In a dusty corner of a prison near Ouagadougou, a man named Issouf sat on the floor of his small, dark cell. His clothes were torn, his hair unkempt, and his eyes held a tired look that no sleep could fix. For 7 years, he had lived like this. Every day felt the same. The same tasteless food, the same cracked walls, the same heavy silence. He wasn't supposed to be here. Before prison, Issouf had been a teacher. He loved books, chalk, and the quiet rhythm of the classroom. Children listened when he spoke, and he believed in shaping young minds. One afternoon, while walking home from school, police officers stopped him. They said he looked like someone who had robbed a store nearby. He laughed, thinking it was a joke, but the handcuffs clicked shut, and no one listened to his story after that. The trial was short. The evidence was thin, but it didn't matter. He didn't have a lawyer who cared. His words were ignored. Guilty, the judge said. 20 years. Issouf's world fell apart. His family tried to fight for him at first. His mother came every week with food and tears in her eyes. But over time, the visits stopped. People moved on. The world outside forgot him. Some guards called him Ghost. Others didn't bother with a name. But Issouf never gave up hope. Every morning, he whispered a prayer. Not for release, but for someone to see him. Truly see him. Someone who would believe him. One morning, a strange buzz filled the prison. Guards moved faster than usual. Someone important was coming. Prisoners stood straight, some hoping to be noticed, others too broken to care. They say it's the president, one man whispered. Yeah, right, another scoffed. Presidents don't visit places like this. But the gate creaked open, and in walked a tall, serious man surrounded by a few soldiers. His steps were slow, but his eyes scanned everything. President Ibrahim Traoré had come. Issouf stayed in the back of his cell, watching from the shadows. He didn't move. He had learned not to hope. The president walked past rows of cells, asking questions, speaking with inmates. He didn't just nod and move on. He listened. Then he stopped in front of Issouf's cell. "What's your name?" the president asked. "Issouf," came the quiet reply. The president looked at him closely. "How long have you been here?" 7 years. "What for?" "They said I robbed a store," Issouf said, voice steady. "I didn't." The president didn't speak for a moment. Then he turned to one of his aides. "Check his file," he said. "I want to know everything." And just like that, something shifted. Issouf felt it, not in his body, but deep in his chest. A light flickered, tiny but real. After years of silence, someone was listening. The president moved on, but the prison felt different now. Something had been noticed, and Issouf, the forgotten teacher in the back of the cell, had been seen. 3 days passed after the president's visit. The prison buzz had faded. Most of the inmates went back to their routines, thinking it was just another speech or inspection. But Issouf couldn't stop thinking about that moment. The president had looked at him, really looked, and he had asked for his file. On the 4th day, a guard called Issouf's name. "Come," he said. "Someone wants to talk to you." It was rare for anyone to ask for Issouf. His legs felt shaky as he stood up. He followed the guard through long, narrow hallways, past locked doors and rusted bars. They stopped in a small room. Inside sat a young woman in a clean white shirt. Beside her was a man with a laptop. Both looked serious, but not unkind. "Hello, Issouf," the woman said. "My name is Fatou. We're part of a legal review team sent by the president." Issouf didn't speak. He was used to being ignored, not interviewed. "We've read your file," Fatou continued. "Some things don't make sense." The man clicked his keyboard. "You were arrested for a robbery that happened across town from your school, but witnesses say you were still teaching when the crime took place." "I told them that," Issouf said softly. No one listened. Fatou nodded. "We believe you." Those 3 words hit Issouf harder than any punch. He didn't know whether to smile or cry. Someone believed him. Finally, "We want to help you," Fatou said, "but we need everything you can remember. Details, times, names." And so, Issouf spoke. He told them about his last day of freedom, about the classroom, the lesson he was teaching, the moment the police stopped him. He described the cell where he spent the last 7 years, the guards who mocked him, and the nights he cried quietly so no one would hear. Fatou wrote everything down. The man beside her nodded as he read the file again and again. When they left, Issouf felt tired but lighter, as if a small weight had been lifted. Back in the office of the president, Fatou placed the file on his desk. "Mr. President," she said, "we found major problems in this case. No real evidence. No defense lawyer present during key parts of the trial. It looks like he was blamed to close the case quickly." President Traoré looked at the papers. "How did this happen?" "He's not the only one," Fatou said. "There may be others." The president leaned back in his chair. Outside the window, the sun was setting over the capital. He thought of his visit to the prison, the silence in those cells, and the eyes of men like Issouf who had been waiting for justice. "Start the process," he said. "Get him out." In the prison, days passed slowly. Issouf didn't know what was happening. He prayed, waited, and tried not to hope too much. Then one morning, the same guard returned. "Pack your things," he said. "You're leaving." "Leaving?" Issouf blinked. "You've been cleared. You're free." Those words didn't seem real. Not after 7 years. But the door opened, and the sun outside was waiting. Issouf stood in the prison courtyard, his hands shaking. The sunlight felt warm on his skin, but it also felt foreign. It had been 7 years since he had seen the outside world. 7 years since he had smelled fresh air, seen children playing, or heard the sound of laughter. Everything felt so different now. "Come on, Issouf," the guard said, nudging him gently. "We don't have all day." With slow steps, Issouf walked toward the prison gate. Each footstep felt heavy, like the ground was holding him back. The world beyond the gates seemed both beautiful and terrifying. He had dreamed of this moment, but now that it was here, he didn't know what to expect. He had no family waiting for him, no friends. Over the years, everyone had moved on. His mother had passed away a few years earlier, and the rest of his relatives had lost hope of seeing him free again. "Are you coming?" the guard asked again, looking back. Issouf nodded and stepped outside. The bright sun hit him all at once. For a moment, he squinted, trying to adjust to the light. The prison walls behind him seemed to close off the past, but the future was still a blur. A car was waiting for him just outside the gates. A man in a suit stepped forward. "Issouf," the man said, offering his hand. "My name is El Hadji. I'm from the president's office. We've been working to clear your name." "The president?" Issouf asked, still unsure if he was dreaming. "Yes, the president himself ordered a review of your case." Issouf felt his heart race. "So, I'm free?" "Yes, the legal team found evidence that proves you were wrongfully convicted." For a moment, Issouf couldn't speak. The words felt unreal. He looked around, taking in the world he hadn't seen in so long. The trees swayed in the breeze, cars passed by on the road, and people walked along the sidewalks. Everything seemed so fast, so loud. He felt like he was in a world he didn't belong to anymore. "Thank you," Issouf whispered. El Hadji smiled gently. "Let's get you somewhere safe. We can talk more there." As they drove through the busy streets of Ouagadougou, Issouf stared out the window, lost in thought. He couldn't shake the feeling of fear that still gripped him. Freedom wasn't as simple as stepping out of the prison. There were people out there who had forgotten him, who had built their lives without him. How could he fit back in? El Hadji must have sensed his worry. "The president wants to help you rebuild your life," he said. "He knows how difficult this will be, but you're not alone." The car turned onto a quieter street and stopped in front of a small building. Inside, it was clean and comfortable. A desk, chairs, and a small sofa. A few papers were stacked neatly on the table. "This is your new place," El Hadji explained. "We've arranged a support program, housing, a small income until you find work, and help from the community." Issouf looked around, still unsure of everything. He hadn't imagined this part of his life, but he was free. And that was enough for now. "Thank you," Issouf said again, his voice thick with emotion. "You're welcome," El Hadji replied. "Now, take your time. The next steps are yours to decide." As the door closed behind him, Issouf sat down on the sofa. He took a deep breath and looked out the window. The world was still loud, still fast, but now he had a chance to be part of it again. For the first time in years, Issouf felt like he could breathe. The days that followed were strange for Issouf. Each morning, he woke up in a bed that was his own, in a room with walls that didn't feel like a cage. But freedom, as he quickly learned, wasn't just about having a roof over his head. It was about rebuilding a life that had been shattered. The first week, he stayed mostly inside, unsure of what to do or where to go. El Hadji checked on him regularly, bringing food, offering help. "Take it slow," he would say. "This is a big change." But Issouf couldn't stop thinking. The world outside was moving, and he felt stuck. He was a man who had once had a purpose, teaching children, helping them learn, but now he wasn't sure where to begin again. One afternoon, El Hadji suggested something. "Why don't you come with me? There's a place where you can talk to other people who have been through something similar. Maybe they can help you." It was a small community center on the edge of the city. Inside, it wasn't much, just a few chairs and tables, with a chalkboard at the front. A man in his 50s, wearing glasses and a tired smile, greeted them. "This is Baba," El Hadji said. "He helps people like you, people who've been through the system and come out the other side." Baba shook Issouf's hand warmly. "I know how you feel," he said. "I've been where you are. It takes time, but you'll find your way." For the next few hours, Issouf listened. Baba talked about his own experience, about how he had spent years in prison for a crime he didn't commit, about the struggle of starting over. Baba had found work in a small bookstore and eventually built a life again. He had learned that starting over wasn't easy, but it was possible. Issouf felt something shift inside him. For the first time in a long while, he realized that there were others like him, people who had lost everything and had to rebuild from nothing. Maybe he wasn't alone after all. As the weeks went by, Issouf began to take small steps. He went to the community center more often, learning from Baba and others who shared their stories. He started to feel the weight of his past lifting. His memories of the prison, the dark cell, the loneliness, it was all still there, but it didn't control him anymore. He found that he enjoyed talking to the younger people at the center, sharing his knowledge about history and literature. Even though he didn't have a classroom anymore, he could still teach. He could still make a difference. One day, as he was leaving the community center, El Hadji called him. "The president wants to see you," he said. "He's asked to meet you personally." Issouf's heart raced. He hadn't expected this. After everything, why would the president want to see him again? When he arrived at the president's office, he was greeted warmly. President Traoré stood up and shook his hand. "I'm glad to see you doing well, Issouf," he said. "We've been following your progress. You've done more than just survive. You're building something." "Thank you," Issouf replied. "I never thought I'd be here, doing this." The president smiled. "You're stronger than you think. That's why I want to offer you a position. We need people like you, people who can teach, who can help others who've been through what you've experienced." Issouf stared at him, surprised. "You want me to work for the government?" "Yes," the president said. "Your experience matters. You have a chance to make a difference on a larger scale, and I believe you can." It was a moment of realization. Issouf hadn't just been freed from prison. He had been given a new chance to live, to help, to change the lives of others. It wasn't the life he had imagined, but it was one he could be proud of. As he left the president's office, Issouf felt a new purpose. He had been given a gift, freedom, not just from the prison walls, but from the past that had held him back. And now he could begin again. Issouf's new job was nothing like he had imagined. When the president had offered him a position, he had thought it would be in an office, behind a desk, making decisions. But instead, he was sent to work in the heart of the community, with people who were rebuilding their own lives, just like he had. At first, Issouf wasn't sure if he was ready. He had been in prison for so long, he had forgotten what it felt like to trust himself. But slowly, he began to understand. The work was hard, but it gave him a sense of purpose. He spent his days visiting local schools, talking to young people who had faced challenges similar to his own. Many of them had parents in prison. Some were struggling with poverty, and others simply lacked the support they needed to succeed. Issouf used his experience to show them that even after everything falls apart, it's still possible to rebuild. One afternoon, he visited a small school on the edge of the city. The children were lively, excited to meet the man who had been freed after so many years. They asked him questions. What was it like in prison? How did he survive? How did he keep going when everything seemed hopeless? I never gave up, Issouf told them. There were days when I felt like I couldn't take another step, but I kept moving forward, even if it was just one small step at a time. The children listened, hanging on to every word. Issouf had never realized how much power his story held. He was no longer just a man who had been locked away. He was a symbol of hope, a living example that no matter how broken life seemed, it was possible to start over. After his visit to the school, Issouf met with a group of community leaders. They were impressed with his ability to connect with the young people, to help them see the possibilities beyond their struggles. "You have a gift, Issouf," one of the leaders said. "Your experience, your story, it touches people. You can help more than just these children. You can help the whole community." Issouf wasn't sure if he was ready for such a big responsibility. But as the days went by, he felt a growing confidence. He had something important to offer, something that no one else could, his own journey from darkness to light, and he was ready to share it with others. Meanwhile, the president kept in touch with him regularly, encouraging him and offering support. "You're doing important work, Issouf," he said during one of their meetings. "This is just the beginning. You have the chance to make real change." Issouf had never felt so alive. He was no longer the man who had been forgotten in a dark cell. He was now part of something bigger. He was part of a movement to change the future, to help those who had been left behind, just like he had been. His work wasn't easy, but every day he saw the difference he was making. He saw young people finding hope, leaders taking action, and families coming together. And it was all because someone had believed in him. One evening, as Issouf walked home from his community meeting, he stopped and looked up at the sky. For the first time in years, he felt a deep sense of peace. He had been given a second chance, not just to live, but to make a difference. He wasn't just free from prison. He was free to build a future. Months passed, and Issouf continued his work in the community. Each day felt like a small victory. He wasn't just teaching the children or speaking at meetings. He was helping to build trust where it had once been broken. People began to believe in themselves again. They started to see that change was possible. Issouf's story was shared far and wide. It wasn't just in the small community center anymore. The media picked it up, and soon his journey of resilience became a symbol of hope across the country. People from other cities reached out, asking him to speak at local events, to share his experience, and to inspire others who felt trapped in their own struggles. One afternoon, Issouf was invited to a national conference on justice and reform. It was being held in the capital, and the president himself would be there. Issouf was nervous. He had never spoken to such a large crowd before. The idea of standing in front of hundreds of people made his stomach turn, but he knew it was important. The day of the conference arrived, and Issouf stood backstage, watching as the room filled with politicians, activists, and community leaders. His heart raced. He thought about his years in prison, the hopelessness he had felt, and how far he had come. Now, here he was, about to speak in front of people who had the power to make real change. When his name was called, Issouf stepped onto the stage. The lights were bright, and for a moment, everything felt blurry. But then he saw the faces in the crowd, people who were eager to hear what he had to say. He took a deep breath and began. "I am not a hero," he started, his voice steady but quiet. "I am just a man who was wronged, a man who was lost and forgotten. But I am here today because I didn't give up." He went on to share his story, the pain of losing his freedom, the loneliness of prison, and the moment he realized he had to rebuild his life from scratch. He talked about the support he had received from the president, from the community, and from the people who had believed in him when no one else did. "Change doesn't happen overnight," Issouf said, "but it happens. When we come together, when we support each other, we can heal. We can rebuild." The room was silent as he spoke, and when he finished, there was a long pause. Then the audience erupted into applause. Issouf stood there, overwhelmed, not expecting such a response. He had just shared the most personal part of his life, and yet it felt like a weight had been lifted. After the speech, many people came up to him, shaking his hand and thanking him for his words. Some of them were government officials, others were regular citizens who had been touched by his story. "You have a gift," one of the activists said. "You can inspire real change." The president approached him afterward, a proud smile on his face. "You did well, Issouf. This is what true leadership looks like." Issouf looked around the room, feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. It wasn't just for him anymore. It was for everyone who had struggled, everyone who had been forgotten. They had a chance to rebuild, too. As he left the conference that day, Issouf felt the weight of his past, but also the power of his future. He was no longer just a man who had survived prison. He was a man who had found his purpose. And he wasn't stopping now. After the national conference, Issouf felt like he was walking on air. People had listened to him, believed in him, and applauded his story. It was a moment he would never forget. But even as the applause faded, a new feeling began to grow inside him. He realized that his journey wasn't over. In fact, it was only just beginning. With each new day, Issouf found himself taking on more responsibilities. He continued to visit schools, talking to students about his experience and encouraging them to never give up, no matter how difficult life became. He worked. Months turned into years, and Issouf's life continued to transform. What had started as a personal journey to reclaim his freedom had grown into something much bigger. His work with the community, his dedication to helping others rebuild their lives, became a movement. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about everyone who had been wronged, everyone who had been forgotten. One day, Issouf stood in front of a large crowd again. This time, it was at a rally for justice reform, and the crowd was even bigger than the one he had faced at the conference. He had spoken at many events, but this one felt different. This time, he wasn't just telling his story. He was speaking as part of a larger cause, a cause that was changing the very fabric of the country. The president had attended the rally too, standing beside Issouf as a sign of support. The two men, once strangers, now share a common goal. The president had seen the work Issouf had done in his community, and he knew that Issouf's voice was one that could not be ignored. "Today, we stand together," Issouf began, his voice strong, "not just as individuals, but as a nation that believes in justice. We stand for those who have been forgotten, for those who have been hurt, and for those who need a second chance. This is our fight." The crowd erupted in applause, and Issouf could see the hope in their eyes. For many of them, his words weren't just a speech. They were a promise, an assurance that their struggles were being heard and that they weren't alone. As the rally ended, people came up to Issouf, thanking him for everything he had done. They told him how his story had inspired them, how his strength had given them hope. He smiled, but inside, he felt something deeper. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about the collective strength of the people. In the years that followed, the justice system in the country began to change. More and more people were being released from prison after wrongful convictions. Laws were updated to prevent similar injustices from happening in the future. And it was all because of the people who had come together, because of Issouf and those who believed in him. Issouf's work wasn't over. There was still much to be done, still so many people who needed help. But he had made a difference, and he knew that the ripple effect of his actions would continue long after he was gone. One evening, as he walked through the streets of his city, Issouf thought about everything he had experienced. He thought about the lonely days in prison, the fear of freedom, and the uncertainty of starting over. But he also thought about the joy he felt now, the sense of purpose that had come from helping others. He stopped by the community center, the place where it had all started. It was filled with people, children learning, adults talking, everyone working together to build a better future. Issouf felt a deep sense of pride. This is my legacy, he thought. This is what I was meant to do. He didn't need to be remembered as a hero. He didn't need to be celebrated. The change he had sparked in the hearts of others was enough. As he stood there, watching the community thrive, Issouf realized that his freedom had not just been about escaping prison. It had been about finding a way to make the world a better place for everyone. And that was the greatest gift of all.